Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, May 3rd, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. U.S. officials do not think Israel can beat Hamas. So the New York Times reported on Thursday that there is a widespread belief among U.S. officials that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's goal of eradicating Hamas in Gaza is unattainable. And, you know, we have heard this before. We've seen signs that the U.S. doesn't think that that's a realistic goal. The reason why I think this is important to make the top story is the fact that the U.S. continues to give Netanyahu, to give Israel everything they want, unconditional military aid to support these horrific atrocities in Gaza. And what is the end game? There is no end game. So just a few of those indications I put together in this story. Back in March, the U.S. intelligence agencies released their annual threat assessment, and it said that Israel will face lingering armed resistance for years to come from Hamas, and that the Israeli military would struggle to destroy Hamas's underground infrastructure. And this is a public document that they released, that all the U.S. intelligence, what they call the intelligence community, released together, saying that they don't think this government, this military that they're backing, can achieve its goal. And the Washington Post reported not too long ago that the U.S. did not think Israel had clear or attainable goals as far back as October. And this New York Times report, this was kind of buried in it, this fact that there's a widespread belief among U.S. officials that they don't think Israel can achieve this. The report focused on Blinken's trip to Israel and the difference in messaging that we see from the Biden administration and from Netanyahu. Blinken was there saying that the U.S. still opposes Israel invading Rafah without a clear plan for civilians. But what was Netanyahu saying? He was saying, we're going to invade no matter what. That's what he told Blinken. And Blinken was also calling for Hamas to accept Israel's latest proposal for a hostage deal and temporary ceasefire. But Netanyahu, signaled that he was not interested in a deal. He said, specifically on Tuesday, he said that Israel will invade Rafah with or without a deal. And if you remember, I said, I think that's Netanyahu trying to sabotage the talks. And that's what U.S. officials think as well. This New York Times report said that U.S. officials were taken aback by the timing of Netanyahu's comments because they think Hamas would only accept a deal if they believed releasing hostages could lead to a permanent ceasefire. So that's been their demand, and you have Netanyahu saying, we're going to invade Rafah no matter what. Clearly seems like he's trying to sabotage these talks. Still no response from Hamas. It's been a while, a few days now, since they said they were going to respond. So it's not clear exactly when that's going to happen. But despite, you have this difference in public messaging from the Biden administration, from Netanyahu's government, and there's kind of this narrative in the media that Biden's so mad at Netanyahu, but despite that, there's been no change. And I had some hope at a certain point that maybe at some point something would give and there would be a change. But no, the U.S., it's clear they're not going to put real pressure on Netanyahu not to invade Rafah, that they're not going to change anything. They're just going to keep giving them whatever they want. And I put the death toll in here. The latest number from Gaza's health ministry that was put out on Thursday is that 34,596 people have been killed. And that's a total that includes over 14,000 children. And it does not take into account the thousands of people who are trapped or dead, missing and presumed dead under the rubble. All right, so the next one here, the UN says that the scale of destruction in Gaza has not been seen since World War II. So The UN said on Thursday that the scale of destruction in Gaza has not been seen since World War II and that it would take a minimum of 16 years to rebuild homes in the Strip. So this is Abdallah al-Dardari. He is a UN Assistant Secretary General. He said, quote, "We have not seen anything like this since 1945, that intensity in such a short time and the massive scale of destruction," end quote. So he said that 72% of all residential buildings in Gaza have been partially or completely destroyed. He estimates that the reconstruction will cost between $30 and $40 billion, and that's right now. And Israel's bombing campaign has been compared to the U.S. and Allied strategic bombing of Japanese and German cities during World War II, which includes the firebombing of Dresden and the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And another thing, you know, I think it was a listener of this show actually pointed out to me, nobody ever talks about the bombing of North Korea during the Korean War. The U.S. dropped more bombs on Korea than it dropped on Japan during World War II. You know, everybody thinks of the destruction of Japanese cities, and it's not just the atomic bombs. It was a long strategic bombing campaign, including the firebombing of Tokyo, but the U.S. basically repeated that strategy in North Korea, and then, of course, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos were so heavily bombed. That was more kind of on rural areas, so it's a little different, but still, you know, it's not like this stopped after World War II, that strategy. And Israeli officials have pointed to World War II to justify the massive number of civilian casualties. And this is something, according to Biden, that Netanyahu brought up in conversations with Biden. So, and of course, a reconstruction effort in Gaza could only begin once the Israeli siege comes to an end. And there's no sign that will happen anytime soon. Even if there's this deal, we just have Netanyahu insisting it's going to be a temporary ceasefire. So these numbers of how long it could take to rebuild, how much it's going to cost, could keep going up and up and up. And of course, there's a lot of Israelis with their eyes on the Gaza Strip. You know, they want settlements and some beachfront condos, I would imagine. That seems to be what Jared Kushner has in mind, at least. All right, so the next one here. Israel tells the U.S. that it will target the Palestinian Authority if ICC issues warrants. So Axios reported that Israel has told the U.S. that if the International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for senior Israeli officials, it would take strong action against the Palestinian Authority that could lead to its collapse. So Israel has claimed that it has information that suggests the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is encouraging the ICC to issue arrest warrants that are expected to target Netanyahu, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. A senior Israeli official told Axios that if the warrants are issued, the Israeli cabinet would likely approve action that could collapse the PA. Israel could freeze the transfer of tax revenue that it collects for the PA, which would bankrupt the authority. And of course, a collapsed PA would help out when it comes to, would help the settlers' goal of continuing to expand in the West Bank. And that is a goal that's supported by the current Israeli government. They ultimately want to annex the West Bank, so destroying the Palestinian Authority would probably help them move that along. All right, so the next one here. Israeli military chief says Israel is preparing for an offensive against Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. So touring the northern border of with Lebanon, Israeli military chief of staff Herzi Halevi met with Northern Command for an assessment of the planned military operation against Lebanon and told reservists that they are preparing for an offensive in the north. So Israeli military officials have been threatening to invade Lebanon for a while now. But here's some new threats. I feel like we haven't heard it in a little while. He said, quote, its objectives are both to restore security to the communities near the Gaza Strip and to bring the hostages back securely, end quote. He did not elaborate on the specifics or the timing of the offensive, but Israeli military brass have made a big deal of planned operations against Lebanon. The military goal has been presented as both moving Hezbollah back from the border and allowing refugees to return to northern Israel. So, and the trade of fire continues. You know, we see still just about, I think, every day, Israel launching airstrikes in Lebanon, Hezbollah firing some rockets across the border as well. So still a situation that could really escalate. All right, so the next one here, Biden says that the protests have not made him reconsider. So President Biden said on Thursday that the college protests on campuses across the country have not caused him to rethink his unconditional support for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. And he made these remarks when answering a question from a reporter after he delivered some brief comments on the protest movement, on the situation with these college protests. And he portrayed the demonstrations as violent. But as far as I've seen, I'm sure there's been some instances, but overall the movement has been overwhelmingly peaceful, is how it looks to me. The only significant violence that has occurred is when the cops moved to clear out these encampments or occupied buildings like they did in Colombia. And there was also the pro-Israel crowd that attacked one of the encampments at UCLA. But overall, I mean, this is a peaceful movement. The colleges can say that the students are trespassing, but even Biden mentions the destruction of property. Still, I haven't really seen that, or it doesn't seem like that's widespread at all. But anyway, that's what he's going with here. So he said, quote, "So let me be clear, peaceful protest in America, violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest," end quote. Again, to me, it has seemed very peaceful. Biden made clear that he supported the crackdown on the protests, which has led to over 2,000 arrests across the country so far. So the president also, again, appeared to smear the movement as anti-Semitic, despite the fact that Jewish students are involved in the protests. He said, quote, "There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students," end quote. So while he condemned the protests, Biden did not. He said that he didn't think the National Guard should intervene. Biden's position on the protest movement puts him at odds with some Democrats, including the College Democrats of America, which is the official DNC wing, student outreach arm. So, it seems like he doesn't care. He's going to ride this, till the end. Doesn't matter if it's going to tank his chances of winning in November. All right, so the next one here, Riot police clear pro-Palestine encampment at UCLA. So this article is from Middle East Eye. And really, so that encampment at UCLA, that's where the one that came under attack. Hundreds of Riot police descended on a pro-Palestine encampment at the University of California in Los Angeles early on Thursday, and they used flashbangs and rubber bullets to clear the protest site as screams rang out from behind the student-erected barricades. Discarded tents and sleeping bags could be seen strewn across the main campus, Royce Quad. So I saw a lot of videos of this and stuff, in the aftermath, and they just kind of destroyed everything that was there. So they broke that one up, and this is happening at a lot of these colleges that they send in the cops to break it up, and it ends up being pretty violent encounters that the protesters have with the police. We have one story down here. I think it's Berkeley that apparently is taking kind of a hands-off approach to their protesters, and apparently things have been able to carry on like normal at Berkeley. I think it's Berkeley. Yeah, Berkeley takes hands-off approach to Gaza campus protests. Which is interesting, and I know a few other colleges have taken a similar approach. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. admits that it killed a Syrian civilian in May 2023. So U.S. Central Command acknowledged on Thursday that its forces killed a civilian in a May 2023 drone strike in northwest Syria, walking back its initial claim that it killed an al-Qaeda leader. So Lufti Hassan Masto, he was a 56-year-old father of 10. He was hit by a Hellfire missile on May 3rd, 23 in a rural area of Syria's northern Idlib province while tending his sheep. So evidence surfaced immediately that the U.S. killed a civilian with the strike. I covered it at the time. This is the same day as the drone strike, that there was pretty much immediate evidence that they killed a civilian. And CENTCOM actually put out a statement that day claiming that it killed an al-Qaeda leader, and then it later came out that they actually didn't know, that they put out that statement before they had confirmation of who they killed. So it's been clear for a while, but now they have admitted it. They've released the results of an investigation. The investigation actually concluded in November of last year. It's unclear why they waited until now to make it public. Maybe they were waiting for the 1 year, I don't know, anniversary. But they said in a press release, quote, "The investigation determined U.S. forces misidentified the intended al-Qaeda target and that a civilian, Mr. Lufti Hassan Masto, was struck and killed instead. Many of the facts and other findings of this investigation involve classified information and cannot be shared publicly," end quote, of course. And there's no sign that there will be any accountability or punishment for the killing of this civilian, since the command claimed that the investigation concluded the strike was conducted in compliance with the law of armed conflict as well as Department of Defense and CENTCOM policies. It said that several issues could have been improved, but no accountability, no punishment. And this is what we see. American drone strikes have a history of killing civilians, and they have put in place these measures to do investigations. But they do investigations and then nothing happens. The one example I could think of in recent years was the 2021 Kabul drone strike that killed 10 civilians when the U.S. was withdrawing from Afghanistan. It killed 7 children, and just a slaughter, a massacre. And they did this big investigation, but nothing happened. Nobody was punished. Like, there was nothing, not even like a symbolic punishment for anybody. So that's what happens when they investigate themselves, I guess. All right, so the next one here, 8 Syrian soldiers wounded in Israeli attack on Damascus. So this is an article from Jason Ditz. It says at least 8 Syrian soldiers were reported injured this evening when Israel carried out a missile strike against a building operated by security forces in the Najha area of the capital city of Damascus. The strike was reportedly launched from the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and caused material damage to the building, in addition to the injuries, according to a statement by Syria's defense ministry. So Jason says, though Israeli attacks on Syrian military targets are not unusual, this evening's strike was noteworthy as it was the first Israeli attack in over a month since a strike on April 1st, and the April 1st strike was the bombing of the consulate in Damascus, the Iranian embassy that was attached to the Iranian embassy that killed the senior IRGC commander and several other members of the IRGC that led to this whole big escalation. So they're back to, there were some, I think, unconfirmed reports of Israeli airstrikes in between now and then, but this is being reported by, the Syrian military and everything, the latest strike. So Israel could be back to its old pattern of bombing Syria pretty frequently. And there's always that risk still of escalation, because they did kill a few Iranians before they bombed the consulate building. And Iran usually kind of downplays that stuff. But now, have things changed? If Israel kills an Iranian in Syria again, are they going to respond again? What's going to happen? I think that's a big question. All right, so the next one here, Macron, the French president, he still will not rule out sending troops to Ukraine. So Macron did an interview with the Economist, and he was asked, do you still believe that NATO should not rule out the idea of sending troops to Ukraine to fight Russia? Not talking about just sending troops for to be military advisors, explicitly ground troops to fight Russia. And he says, yeah, we still shouldn't rule it out. And this is something, he has reaffirmed multiple times since he first said it, I think back in March. But, he was asked really specifically about ground troops fighting Russia. And he got into some hypotheticals here. So he said, quote, "Absolutely, as I said, I'm not ruling anything out because we are facing someone who is not ruling anything out," end quote. He said that if Russian forces broke through Ukrainian lines and Ukraine requested NATO troops, that it should be seriously considered. He said, quote, "If the Russians were to break through the front lines, if there were a Ukrainian request, which is not the case today, we would legitimately have to ask ourselves this question," end quote. And, you know, when he was talking about sending troops to Ukraine, most other NATO members said, no, hold on a second. We're not doing that. Even though there is this small number of like special operations forces and the U.S. is considering sending military advisors, like a pretty decent number of them, up to 60. He's talking about, again, sending ground troops to fight. But one point he made that I think was actually a good point is that NATO, they've ruled out things before and then ended up doing them, like sending certain weapon systems. So he said, quote, "At the NATO summit in the summer of 2022, we all ruled out the delivery of tanks, deep strike missiles, aircraft. We are now all in the process of doing this, so it would be wrong to rule out the rest," end quote. And again, this would mean war between NATO and Russia, which would likely escalate into nuclear war pretty quickly. And, you know, this is what he's talking about here. It's like this used to be unthinkable, but now this is something he's just talking about all the time. And earlier in the war, he was one of the he wasn't nearly as hawkish as some other NATO country leaders, talking about diplomacy and that Russia's security concerns should be taken into account when it comes to any sort of peace deal. But now he's just keeps talking about this. It's really crazy. All right, so the next one here, as Russians advance, Ukraine struggles to build defensive lines. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Russian forces are advancing in several places across the 600-mile front line in Ukraine, straining Kiev's ability to build rear fortifications. Some in the Ukrainian military fault the country's leadership for not building stronger second and third line defenses last year, while Russian troops were stalled. According to a dozen Ukrainian soldiers, government officials, and the construction company directors who spoke with the Associated Press, Kiev is struggling to set up these defensive lines as they retreat. So I know when they lost Avdiivka, that was said to be a big, one of the last really strongly fortified lines. So apparently they're falling back to, you know, not as to areas that just aren't defended as well. A deputy infantry commander fighting near Avdiivka explained that the defensive line needed to be built last year during Ukraine's offensive. And this was the counteroffensive that the U.S. pushed for, even though they knew Ukraine didn't really have a chance of regaining any significant territory. So this commander said, quote, "There was an absence of responsibility. People didn't understand that fortifications can save your life if you do it in advance. Many people thought we wouldn't need to prepare such lines. They didn't expect a new Russian offensive," end quote. So situation just really is not looking good for the Ukrainians on the front lines. All right, so the next one here, Russian troops enter a U.S. base in Niger. So this is kind of a crazy story. Reuters first reported on Thursday that Russian troops have entered a military base in Niger that houses U.S. military personnel. A senior U.S. defense official said that the Russian troops were at Air Base 101 in Niger's capital, Niamey, but that they were using a separate hangar and were not mingling with U.S. troops. So I was talking about the big drone base the U.S. has in Niger. That's Air Base 201, which is in a different part of Niger. This is Air Base 101, and as far as I understand it, most of the about 1,100 U.S. military personnel in Niger are at Air Base 201, but they still have some at Air Base 101. CNN later reported that Russian troops have been operating out of the base for at least several weeks, and this news comes after the U.S. said that it would agree to a request from Niger's government to leave the country, but the U.S. is dragging its feet, and now they're claiming a final decision hasn't been made. So, one of the reasons why Niger ordered the U.S. to leave was that the U.S. was lecturing them about their relationship with Russia. So now we see Russian troops able to access these bases that have a U.S. presence. It could be part of maybe the Niger's strategy to get the U.S. to leave, to show that they're not welcome. Of course, there's tensions between the U.S. and Russia. It's just considering everything else that's going on. This is definitely something that sounds really bad, like it can, maybe escalate into something. But, I would be surprised if that happens. I still think it just, they're two professional militaries. I don't think, but you never know. I mean, at the same time, you had this whistleblower that came out and said the U.S. refusal to leave Niger was endangering U.S. troops, and that the U.S. was trying to maintain a facade of good relations between the U.S. and Niger. What if Niger, this military-led government, which came to power after the July 2023 coup, what if they decide, all right, we got to get them out, and they decide to do something? I mean, these troops are sitting ducks. I mean, it's probably just a few hundred at this Airbase 101. So, I mean, it's just another reason the U.S. has got to get out of Niger, but they're still claiming that a final decision hasn't been made. I think another U.S. official just said that this week. And Niger has shown no interest, no sign that it's interested in negotiating some sort of new deal. All right, so the last story here, U.S. and Philippine forces fire rockets toward the South China Sea. So this article is from the South China Morning Post, and these are the Balikatan exercises that are still going on, these major military drills that the U.S. and the Philippines are holding. And the United States and Philippine forces fired a dozen rockets in the direction of the South China Sea as part of their joint military exercises. And these military officials are insisting this was not meant to provoke any particular country. They always say these drills are not aimed at any particular country, but this comes as tensions are really high with China in the South China Sea. And where is the U.S. doing drills and firing rockets? In the South China Sea. I mean, it's very provocative. They were firing actually the HIMARS rocket systems into the South China Sea, and the rockets that they were using have a 50-mile range, so that can go pretty deep. And apparently this is the first time these exercises go outside of the Philippines' 12 nautical mile territorial waters. And they go out into the areas where the China and the Philippines have these overlapping claims. So again, it's very, it's clearly, China's going to view this as a provocation, just considering the situation and everything that's going on. And it is very tense in this part of the world. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud, American Intifada for Gaza, what should we expect? One from Murray Pointer, the May 4th deaths, Kent State 54 years ago. One from Representative John J. Duncan Jr., Congress passes mega billions more for Ukraine. One from Ted Snyder, troops on the ground, Biden's plan for Ukraine, talking about the military advisors. And one from James W. Carden, for whom do Biden and Blinken work? So please go check all of that out. And again, it's our fundraiser at antiwar.com. I appreciate all the support. I had a lot of people tell me today that they donated, people that read my letter, so I really appreciate it. Antiwar.com/donate. You can see the different ways you can support us, and we have the matching funds right now. So it's a good time to do it. Credit card donation, PayPal, crypto, all different ways you can support us. So please, if you can, help us out with this fundraiser. If you can't do that, you could also support us just by sharing this show and telling your friends about antiwar.com and all that. So this is it for the week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.